Okay, so let's dive in. We are unpacking a topic that, well, that society often treats like it has an expiration date.
Or that it just vanishes the second health issues come up.
Exactly. We're talking about sexuality, and the sources we've gathered today, they all point to this really powerful and, I think, essential premise.
Which is that sexuality it's a fundamental part of being human. It's a key piece of our quality of life, and it stretches across our entire lifespan, not just when we're young.
Right, and yet it's so often the first thing that gets pushed aside in conversation. The moment someone gets older or faces a chronic illness.
It is. So for you listening, our mission with this deep dive is to really move beyond just the clinical side of things. We're here to unpack all these complex factors, the biological, the psychological, the social, that all shape our sexual self-concept.
Yeah, we're not just looking at what happens in a doctor's office or what some pill can fix. The real goal here is to get at what truly drives sexual satisfaction.
Beyond just simple physical function.
Right. And to do that, we've pulled from a whole range of sources, some deep reviews on aging and sexuality, specialized research into this thing called sexual self-concept, and even reports on how, physical attributes like height or race intersect with intimacy.
And what's so fascinating is how this body of research really insists on defining sexual health, not just by how active someone is.
Okay, so how do they define it?
It's about their perception of a person as a sexual creature. That's the phrase they use.
Wow.
The self-perception, that feeling of worth, that's the core of this whole conversation. Understanding it is it's critical for lifelong well-being.
That deep sense of self, that actually brings us perfectly to the foundation of everything we're discussing, the sexual self-concept, the SSC.
SSC, right. And it's essentially the cognitive piece. It's the perspective you have concerning the sexual parts of self.
So it's the internal story we build about ourselves?
It's exactly that. Your own personal sexual mission statement, if you will. And what the research shows is that your own assessment of your SSC is a huge predictor of your actual sexual behavior and satisfaction.
And when you start to break it down, you realize it's so much more nuanced than just my sex life is good or it's bad. It has these different dimensions.
Yes, positive and negative, and they're constantly in tension with each other. That tension really defines the whole experience.
Okay, so what's on the positive side of that?
On the positive side, you have these really vital ideas like sexual self-efficacy.
Which is the belief in your own ability to perform and enjoy sex.
Precisely. That, plus things like sexual optimism, self-esteem, and ultimately sexual satisfaction. Those are the building blocks.
But the negative aspects, they're the roadblocks, right? The psychological inhibitors.
They are. And we have to identify them. We're talking about things like sexual anxiety, which can lead to just total avoidance, or sexual depression, even a deep-seated fear of sexual relationships altogether.
So to navigate all that complexity, we're going to use a specific framework.
We are. The biopsychosocial framework is really our map for this. It basically says that your physical condition, the bio, and your psychological well-being, the psycho, are the cornerstones.
But they're always interacting with the world around us.
The sociocultural factors.
Exactly. Let's start with that psychological piece then, because that's where this internal observer can just sabotage the whole experience. And it really seems to start with how we feel about our bodies.
It so often does.
Exactly.
Body image dissatisfaction is. It's cited in these sources as a leading inhibitor of sexual enjoyment. And that's regardless of someone's actual size or BMI.
So it's not about what you actually look like. It's about what you think you look like.
100%. It's not just general self-consciousness. It specifically kills pleasure in the moment. The research shows that even if a woman's sexual functioning score is high, meaning, physiologically she's capable of arousal and orgasm, her body dissatisfaction can completely tank her actual experience satisfaction.
And there's a specific term for this mechanism of inhibition. The sources call it spectatoring. I found this fascinating because I think almost everyone can relate to it.
Oh, absolutely. Spectatoring is when you mentally just pull yourself out of the sexual experience. You become an external observer of your own actions.
You stop being a participant and start being a critic.
A critic, exactly. It's this cognitive self-absorption where you're monitoring and evaluating yourself instead of just being immersed in the sensation, in the pleasure.
It's like you're giving a speech and suddenly you start thinking, oh, is my voice shaking? Instead of focusing on the words, you stop doing and you start monitoring.
Precisely. And in a sexual context, that kind of monitoring is it's fatal to pleasure. For women especially, these appearance-based distracting thoughts are so strongly associated with lower satisfaction.
Instead of focusing on your partner, you're worried, do I look okay from this angle? Or what are they thinking about my body?
All of that. And it really highlights how internal validation is what drives satisfaction. The evidence is just so strong that high body esteem predicts greater sexual satisfaction.
Even when you control for physical function.
Yes, even then. And they even broke down what kind of body esteem matters most.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, the strongest link was with the sexual attractiveness subscale. So this is about body parts that aren't easily changed by exercise. Your face, your breasts.
So it's not just about being fit.
Not at all. That was followed by esteem for your physical condition, and then weight concern was last.
So the deepest, hardest to change aspects of our physical identity, the ones really tied to self-acceptance, those are the biggest drivers.
That's the takeaway. It's about a core feeling of self-worth. It's an act of self-acceptance, far more than, say, a 6-week gym program.
And that deep link between the self and sexuality, it must show up even more dramatically when we look at things like past trauma or mental health.
It does. And it's a difficult part of this, but it's essential. Past interactions that involve any kind of coercion or abuse, they create these powerfully negative emotions that they completely reshape that sexual self-concept.
I see.
A history of childhood sexual abuse, for instance, is strongly linked to a lower SSC. It often shows up as feelings of guilt or shame and a much higher risk for sexual dysfunction later in life.
Then what about clinical mental health diagnoses?
Very similar mechanisms. They interfere with that internal narrative. Conditions like schizophrenia or depression, they're linked to higher feelings of inadequacy, of worthlessness, and that just crushes satisfaction.
If you're feeling a general lack of drive or low self-esteem from depression, it's going to bleed into everything.
Of course, it makes that connection between psychological health and sexual satisfaction completely unavoidable.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit now. From the internal psychological world to the undeniable external realities. The biopsychosocial model demands we look at aging and chronic health.
And we have to start with the sheer demographic shift that's happening.
Right, we're seeing it everywhere.
In so many industrialized nations, the 65-plus population it's growing steadily. Life expectancy is higher than ever. And the key thing here is the cultural context of it all.
You mean the baby boomers?
The baby boomers, exactly. Yeah. They introduced more open sexual attitudes decades ago, and now, as they're the ones aging, they've fundamentally changed the expectation. The idea now is that older age should include a good quality of life and continued sexuality.
It's an expectation, not just a hope, but the research shows the reality of that is, well, it's often divided by gender.
It is. There's a clear divergence, especially in activity rates.
Yeah.
If you look at the 75 to 85 age bracket, men report significantly higher sexual activity.
And more interest, a better quality of sex life.
Consistently.
Yeah.
While women in that same group report much lower activity.
And the immediate assumption is that that's purely biological. But why is the decline so much more marked for women?
Because for women, it's so much more tied to psychosocial factors. It's not just about their physiological status. The sources show that the #1 variable for women is the availability of a healthy, interested partner.
That makes perfect sense. The dating pool shrinks, partners' health declines.
All of it. So the decline often has less to do with their own physical ability and more to do with the partner's health or availability or even just the overall quality of the relationship.
And here's the nuance I found really interesting in the sources.
Let me guess the part about distress.
Yes. That older women often experience less distress over a decrease in sexual activity than men or even younger women do.
It implies this powerful ability to adapt, to broaden their definition of what intimacy even is, separating their self-worth from, frequency.
Okay, so if we do look at the purely biological and physiological side, what are the normal changes people should know about?
For men, the most common issue is, of course, erectile dysfunction. This is driven mostly by testosterone naturally declining by about 1 to 2% each year from age 45 or 50.
And that leads to other changes too, right?
Right. A greater need for stimulation, erections might be less rigid, a longer time to respond, and a significantly increased refractory period. That's the recovery time after orgasm.
And for women?
The most common issues are lack of desire and lack of arousal. Hormonal changes from menopause lead to, urogenital effects. Vaginal dryness is a big one, which can lead to painful intercourse or dyspareunia.
And orgasm intensity can also diminish.
It can, but it's so crucial to remember that even when physical changes are happening, A lack of desire is often still psychological at its root.
And if those are the normal changes, the impact of chronic diseases, which affect, what, something like 80% of older adults?
About that, yes. The impact is profound. The diseases themselves, and maybe even more importantly, their treatments, the drugs, the surgeries, they are key factors that alter the normal sexual response. They disrupt the vascular, neurological, and endocrine systems that govern everything.
We focus on the disease, but you're saying the medication is often the silent culprit.
Absolutely. Think about cardiovascular disease.
Mhm.
ED is seen in 40% of men with hypertension. But then you look at the common treatments, beta blockers, diuretics, and a known side effect is ED and loss of libido.
So the cure for one system actively hinders another. It's a trade-off.
A huge one. And you see the same thing with something like diabetes. It directly affects sexual function through nerve and vascular damage. ED happens in half of diabetic men under 60.
The body just can't achieve the necessary physical responses if blood flow is compromised.
It can't. And then you have major illnesses like cancer, where the treatment creates this double burden.
How so?
Well, you have the physical side. Treatments for prostate or breast cancer often require surgery that physically alters sexual function. But the psychological hit, that's often the harder battle.
The change in self-concept.
Exactly. After chemo or major surgery, what that patient sees in the mirror can translate into a huge loss of self-confidence, of their sexual self-concept. That psychological damage is arguably just as critical as the physical one.
And yet, with all these challenges, society seems to put up even more barriers.
It does. Systemic barriers are a huge factor in the biopsychosocial model. Ageist stereotypes are a big one. Doctors often mistakenly see sexual issues in older people as just a normal, irreversible part of aging, so they just dismiss it.
And patients are reluctant to bring it up themselves.
They find it very difficult. Studies consistently show they would much rather their doctor introduce the topic. There's this silent expectation from the patient, but a silent avoidance from the professional.
And that must be magnified tenfold in institutionalized care, like nursing homes.
Oh, absolutely. Residents still desire intimacy, but the barriers, a complete lack of privacy, negative attitudes from staff or family, they actively prevent it.
Okay, so we've covered the bio and the psycho. Now for that final layer, the social and physical lenses we see ourselves through. Let's start with something like height.
Height really functions as a kind of social ladder of attraction. Taller men are consistently favored in cross-cultural studies.
And this is linked to theories of dominance, protection.
Exactly. And what it means in a practical sense is they generally get more dating opportunities, especially in those initial interactions, like on dating apps.
So society gives taller men more chances, but, and this is a big but, that doesn't mean they're better partners or lovers.
Not at all. And the sources make this distinction so clearly. Height might grant you an initial opportunity, but it does not determine sexual quality. Fulfillment comes down to communication, empathy, connection, things that are totally separate from physical stature.
It's the same pattern. The lens affects the opportunity, not the outcome, and that holds true, maybe even more starkly, for race.
It does. Biologically, race has no effect on sexual capacity. Zero. No study suggests otherwise. But it profoundly shapes the experience of sex through that sociocultural lens.
Through external perception.
Yes. Individuals get burdened by these harmful, dehumanizing stereotypes, the hypersexualized black man, the exoticized other, and it forces them into a position where they have to either perform, conform to, or actively defy these caricatures.
That pressure must just kill authenticity and pleasure. Which brings us to a really critical distinction we need to define. Appreciation versus fetishization.
A vital distinction. Appreciation is seeing the whole person, their entire humanity, and being attracted to them. Fetishization is when you're desired specifically for your race. It reduces the person to a fantasy object.
It denies their humanity.
Completely. It's not flattery. It creates this harmful power dynamic where the person is just seen as an instrument to fulfill a narrow fantasy.
We should also touch on the role of substances, because people often use them as a sort of shortcut to desire or performance.
It's the classic double-edged sword.
Hmm.
Alcohol might give you a short-term psychological boost. You feel less inhibited, your sex drive might increase. But chronic use leads to devastating long-term outcomes. Decreased desire, ED, nerve damage.
And what about cannabis?
It's complicated. For some, it can enhance desire and relaxation. For others, it can cause ED or issues with orgasm. It's very individual.
But the chronic use of harder drugs is just uniformly bad.
It is. Long-term use of opioids and cocaine is particularly destructive. It leads to a rapid decline in sex hormones and just severe functional impairment. The brief euphoria has a massive biological cost.
Okay, let's connect all these threads back to that age continuum. The sources identify this powerful shift in focus across our lifespan.
Yes, especially when you think about the importance of that sexual self-concept. In your youth, the focus is so often on frequency and performance.
It's driven by high physiological arousal and, social pressures, validation.
Exactly. But by middle and older age, that focus shifts fundamentally. It moves away from those metrics.
It becomes less about performance and more about quality, self-knowledge, mutual pleasure.
Emotional intimacy. And as physical adaptations become necessary, whether from arthritis or a chronic disease or just normal aging, the definition of intimacy itself broadens so beautifully
It expands beyond just penetrative intercourse.
to include sensual touch, companionship, shared history, mutual respect. The emotional and psychological pillars of the relationship become the central anchors of sexual expression.
So, after all of that, what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've talked about height, health, body image, age, how they all create these hurdles or grant opportunities. But the synthesis of all this research, it seems to deliver one really clear, powerful takeaway.
It does, and it's that physical attributes, demographics, health conditions, they all act as lenses. They affect our psychological scripts, our social opportunities, our internal confidence. But they're not determinants of a fulfilling sex life.
They change the terrain, but not the destination.
A perfect way to put it. The core components of sexual fulfillment are universal. It's communication, mutual respect, emotional safety, self-acceptance, curiosity, and just a relentless focus on shared pleasure.
The ultimate truth here seems to be that one's sexuality is a mosaic. It's this collection of all these complex biological, psychological, and social pieces. And the journey toward fulfillment isn't about conforming to some social hierarchy of attributes like height or weight.
It's about cultivating the right internal mindset. Your body, your identity, they are the instruments of your pleasure, not the judges of it.
So the most profound and lasting sexual discoveries are made not by having the right body, but by cultivating a mindset of openness, of communication, and a focus on humanity over any category.